Professor, do you believe that somehow Peirce's philosophy can provide a cognitive shield to help new generations to think deeply, considering that we are now living in a world where velocity and superficiality seem to be the rule?
I do. I would not spend my life on a philosopher or anything that I did not think had the power to speak to the world at present. The world, especially in its crises and its impending catastrophes. So I do think, I think that Peirce's philosophy has such relevance and power. I also think that there are other philosophical traditions that speak to our historical moment with equal power and relevance. So I'm not saying that Peirce's philosophy is uniquely equipped, but I am saying it is importantly and deeply suited to speak to our moment.
Yeah, and another tradition you quote?
I would draw upon the tradition coming out of the later Wittgenstein. I would draw upon the hermeneutic tradition. Gadamer has been a very important philosopher for me. Ricoeur has been a very important philosopher for me. And finally, these would not be the only traditions, but the phenomenological tradition, especially Merleau-Ponty and Alfred Schutz, who does social phenomenology.
Yeah, very, very nice. I believe that Peirce's semiotics is very good to teach language. I use very much to teach language and to see language. Professor Santaella said that the people don't see language. And in that meaning, I think Peirce's semiotics and Peirce's philosophy is very important today to teach young people.
Right. The fish don't see the water they swim in.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't see the signs we swim in. We're immersed totally, inescapably, at every moment in a sea of signs. And we draw our ability to move, our ability to anticipate, our ability to recall, precisely because we're enveloped and sustained by nothing less than a sea of signs. And I think that the question of language is absolutely crucial, but there's a way in which taking the linguistic turn, focusing upon language and only language, loses something profound. Whereas taking the semiotic turn includes taking the linguistic turn, but it also encompasses gestures and nonverbal signs. So I like to think about language always in reference to Peirce's theory, which is a general theory of signs and not a theory principally or exclusively, for sure, of verbal signs.
Yeah, I agree too much, yeah. And what is your position regarding the challenges that philosophy and other areas of the humanities are facing? Among them, the competition with other spaces, other cultural spaces in special, perhaps more seductive ones, such as the influencer culture.
Right. So I think we have to be ambivalent about the influencer culture. I think it's both good and bad. It's been advantageous and disadvantageous. It's been both emancipatory and in some ways crippling and incarcerating. So I think the crisis of the humanities, and includes the crisis of philosophy, is one site in which the broader, deeper crises of the culture are being felt and are being articulated. So one thing about the crisis of the humanities is this, that the humanities have always been in crisis. Right, and so if you think about the humanities emerging as such in the Renaissance, it was in a moment of historical, cultural crisis. And so it seems to me that the humanities has to be defined in reference to the sites of crisis. And the word critical is connected with the word crisis, because a a crisis is not a catastrophe necessarily. A crisis is a moment of judgment. It comes from the Greek word for judgment. So it's a moment of judgment in which the failure or the refusal to judge is itself a judgment. If I do not act, I'm acting. My inaction is an inaction. If we don't act with regard to climate change, we're in fact facilitating climate change. If we don't act with regard to the collapse or the disintegration of democratic culture, we're contributing to the collapse of democratic culture. I think that there's this awful phrase that Louis Manan at Harvard uses. He blames the humanities for their own crisis. That's something like blaming the victim, but he has a point. And he supposes that we in the humanities have not made a case for a substantive contribution to the knowledge industry. That's the phrase. And I don't like the phrase. You know, what contribution are you making to knowledge? That's it's already in some sense a loaded question, right? Because if the knowledge industry is primarily defined by STEM disciplines, right, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, then we're asked to play a game in which we're bound to lose. We're not going to make those kinds of substantive contributions to the knowledge industry. So what then, if any, would be our contribution? And I think the crisis of humanities throws us back to the task of the humanities, which is displaying in their depth and detail dramas of self-understanding. What the humanities can uniquely do, what art can do, what history can do, all in different ways, but ultimately achieving the same goal. Anthropology understood not strictly as a science, but as a more art of understanding other cultures, cultural geography, philosophy, literature, the study of literature. What all of these can help us do is understand the dynamics and the dramas of self-understanding. And Nietzsche says, you know, we knowers do not know ourselves, and we have not even tried. So no wonder we have not obtained self-knowledge. We even though we say these words, we say we're in the Socratic tradition. We say we're committed to acquiring self-knowledge. We're not seriously doing that. And it seems to me that the crisis of humanities brings to the fore just what our task is. We can help individuals at a critical moment obtain deeper and fuller understanding. Because it's one thing to understand how to build a bomb that blows up the world, or how to do something, and it's another thing, and this is it's actually Bertrand Russell. Wisdom is knowing how to use knowledge humanely and harmoniously. The acquisition of knowledge apart from wisdom is a very dangerous thing. It's putting a gun in a child's hand who doesn't know about death or doesn't know about safety. So having knowledge without wisdom is to be put on a course for disaster.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the next question is related to this.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see the dialogue between philosophy and literature?
I see it as a sibling rivalry.
Sibling rivalry.
Yeah, brother and sister.
Beautiful term, yeah.
I think that the very best philosophers, Plato being the outstanding example of this, the very best philosophers are literary geniuses, and the greatest literary authors always have philosophical depth and dimensions. So they're inextricable, but they're not reducible to one another. There's something that literature does that philosophy does not. Yes. There's something that philosophy does that literature does not. So so in one sense, Rorty's right that philosophy is a genre of literature, but it's a genre of literature which is always, at least slightly, and for more often than not, more than slightly, different from what we call literature. Calvino, Nabokov, Primo Levi, Natalia Ginzburg, Salman Rushdie, they're all philosophical authors, right? And it seems to me, and Rushdie's really wonderful because he's, as all of these authors were, they not only were practitioners, but they reflected on their practice. Insofar as you're reflecting on your practice, you're being philosophical. And in his essays, he says, Salman Rushdie does, you know, we turn to religion, we turn to politics, and we turn to any number of things for answers. And literature does not give answers, but it helps us ask the questions we need to be asking at this moment. Philosophy does the same thing. So the function of philosophy and literature are in part the same, posing the question. Now, what philosophy does is tries to, in a more systematic, sustained, explicit way, answer the questions. And what literature then provides, directly or indirectly, is a critical sensibility for the reception of those answers. Yeah. So there's a deep affinity. They're siblings, but they're also rivals.
Yeah, also very nice term. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, very much. And I always remember a book written by Italo Calvino. You must know 6 Memos for the Next.
Oh yes.
That's wonderful.
Tragic.
Wonderful. Yeah.
He died.
Yeah.
There were lectures to be given at Harvard, and his wife put them together. Yeah. And it's, yes, I mean, and there are things in there. Cecilia Salas, who works on creativity, and is a graduate, she studied with Lucia Santaella, and is a graduate of this university, draws upon Calvino in her work on creativity. No, Calvino's marvelous. He's just marvelous. Yeah.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
And last but not least, I know that you're very fond of young people and their potential. What would you say today to a 15-year-old boy or girl in order to stimulate them to think deeply and protect themselves from falling into superficiality?
Yeah. That's very hard. I think they have to be very careful about their passions, and they also, so it's impossible not to give contradictory advice. Right. So be careful about your passions, be passionate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the one thing that I would most strongly encourage is cultivating the capacity for solitude.
Great. Yeah.
Because you are a creative being, and you're going to draw your inspiration from your friendships, and there's such an emphasis upon socially connected, both virtually and actually physically. But the work can only truly be done when you have the capacity to take yourself out for a time and be alone, and be deeply alone. Don't be worried about what this person's thinking about you or that person's doing. Be alone. So the thing that I think would be the best is to cultivate a capacity for solitude, solitude being a condition for creativity. And the second thing would be experimental and have the courage and the humility to immerse yourself and discipline yourself for the ethos of experimentation. Because what experimentation is a series of failures.
Yeah.
And they're only really failures if you do not learn from them. Because science, that's what science is. You offer a hypothesis, right? And it's wrong. Most right, it's not right usually as originally articulated. It has to be revised, and in many cases, it has to be simply rejected. So now you're on the bandstand, you're playing jazz, and you play what technically is a bad note. The only way it's a bad note is if you can't take it up and use it, right? Yeah. So it's not in some sense a mistake if you can make something good out of it. So create spaces of solitude for yourself. Within those spaces, experiment, and don't be afraid to accept the judgment from yourself or others that was not your best. You're better than that. And don't take it, that's not a slight to your ego or to yourself. That's really, that's an affirmation that you're a more creative self than you have yet realized. And strive within solitude, but also within solidarity and sociality. Strive for creativity, and have the courage and humility to say, I'm better than that.
Yeah, that's very beautiful and very true. Yeah. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Our second interview.
Yes.
Very nice.
Thank you.